excited to kick it off for the whole crowd that's here today. We got a really fun group of folks here. My name is Alec Pundith. I'm an advisor for Gombak AI, and I'm just going to be here as a moderator. But I'd love for the whole crew to just give a quick, brief intro, and then I'll kick us off with what we're going to be discussing today. And it'll be a really engaging discussion. Ian, why don't you kick us off first?
All right, I'm the easiest. Ian Amit, I'm the co-founder and CEO here at Gombak AI. I call myself a recovering CISO. I've been in the security industry for over 25 years now, 4 or 5 out of which I've served as a CISO to public companies. And that drove me to start Gombak, essentially.
Thank you. James, why don't you go next?
Yeah, from a recovering CISO to a practicing CISO. I don't know if there's such a thing as ever stopping being one.
Nope.
I will say I'm a Chief Information Security Officer for AP4. I was the 2-time founder before I took this role. So I went from founder to CISO, and I don't know. That's kind of crazy, but I feel like we traded roles. So yeah, excited to be here.
Awesome. And we got Alex, best for last. Let's go.
Hi guys. I am currently in stealth mode, but I'm a CTO of a deepfake company, which will be announced probably around Black Hat. But before that, I spent 24 years building cybersecurity products. Before that, I was a hacker. So I'm one of the weird people that kind of sits on the fence between security and engineering. And I get to hear how both sides don't like each other particularly very much. So there you go.
Cool. And I think that's why I'm most excited for anybody who's listening in today is we have a really eclectic group. We have folks that have spent the better part of 2-3 decades in security, but also in the developer side. And here at Gombak, we're not just producing like a security tool, right? I mean, the main users are also developers. It affects them deeply and innately. And so that's what we're talking about here today, right? We're going to talk about CSPM versus CNAPP versus infrastructure as code. What do we actually really need? You know, there's so much noise. And I've had a chance to talk with James. I haven't had the pleasure of meeting Alex yet, but I have read some notes from previous discussions. I think everybody here on the call agrees that there's a lot of noise around cloud security tooling. It's crowded, it's confusing. And today, hopefully we're going to cut through it. And for that, we'll just demystify some of the acronyms like CSPM or CNAPP, IaC security. These are things we've all heard, but let's kick it off. I think the first question that I'll ask for the panelists is, how do you see the current market's understanding when you think about CSPM and CNAPP and IaC security as it's evolving? You know, everybody's always going to come back to like Wiz or Orca as like the de facto CNAPP solutions, especially with that big acquisition that happened. And we see Wiz playing in a lot of different places, and I hear it come up sometimes. But let's kind of dissect it for the audience. CSPM, CNAPP, IaC security. How does everybody here think about it? Ian is, of course, going to know a lot about this. He's the founder of the company. I'd love to kick it off to maybe Alex or James if one of you can lead for the discussion.
Alex, I'll let you kick off first, buddy.
Oh, nice job there.
When you call it, it's an interesting conversation, right? I think my experience with cloud, CSPMs and CNAPPs and things like that is the issue you see is the fundamental disconnect between how engineering views those tools and how security views those tools, right? So when you talk about Wiz, and Wiz is a security tool, but the engineers do not view it as a security tool. They actually just view it as an easy way of getting observability into the platform, right? And that they like it because of that. And I think Wiz did a great job. I think both Wiz and Sneak, not in the cloud space, obviously, did a great job of shaping themselves to that sort of developer narrative. And so, so the developers tend to look at Wiz not as a security tool at all. And I think it does a job well on that side of things. I also think it also highlights how poor a job other cloud platforms have done giving observability. And they filled that niche. And then when you look at it from the security side of things, the problem you have from the security side of things is, look, you're playing in the developer's domain, right? That's the truth. And there's a fundamental disalignment, a misalignment between how and about the responsibilities between developers and security. Developers do not get paid to make things secure. Developers get paid to push features out as quickly as possible. And security guys don't have direct access to source code. Well, they do, they can audit it and things, but they're not changing source code, right? And so you have this thing where you have, unfortunately, where you have the cybersecurity guy begging the engineer to fix issues, right? And when you have that, I think Wiz and things like that are great for the security guys to see where the holes are, but it doesn't facilitate a way of maybe getting engineers to fix those holes. I mean, it's just an observability tool, right? And I think that's kind of where you see this disconnect throughout cybersecurity and engineering anyway, right? Like, they're just fundamentally misaligned on what their values are. I don't think engineers are looking to make insecure code. I just don't think it's the primary driver for them. And so when you look at sort of CSPMs, they highlight observability issues and where you have problems, but they're not necessarily putting those problems directly in the path of developers, and they're not really helping mitigate them. They are helping to mitigate those risks in the fact, like, observability is the most important part of it, but they're not helping to mitigate those risks in another manner. There's also, the fact that those tools do not address the idea of reachability. They don't address the idea of, is this really a problem or not? Like, they just address the surface without a deeper understanding. Now, when you talk about infrastructure as code, I mean, it's an incredibly powerful paradigm for developers. I mean, it's very important, but it does also then bring into the world a way of putting in checks for a security group, which wouldn't have had checks before, because the infrastructure as code goes through the code that goes through the pipeline, right? There is it goes through the sort of like CIDC pipeline. There is established patterns to be in that, for security teams to be in that CIDC pipeline. And so I think that, from a security perspective, possibly has more of an impact on how security and engineering will work from the infrastructure side of things. Well, I think CSPM really is a tool that helps you understand what's going on in your network, on your cloud, in a world that traditionally maybe didn't use infrastructure as code from the get-go, where there is drift, there's things like that. So
all right,
that's
so
a complicated answer, I'm afraid.
No, I think it makes a lot of sense. And look, you have a lot of time with boots on ground. It's valid points that you make, but just to summarize it for everybody, I think what I'm hearing is CSPM is really good at saying that there's a problem, but it ships so many alerts, and security is the one who cares about it.
Here's the thing. It's really good at saying there's potentially a problem.
Okay. Yeah.
Because there really is there's a thing of saying that this thing is deployed in my cloud, but there's a world of difference between that and saying this is reachable. So it gives you the beginnings of an inkling of an issue, but I don't think developers view it as a security tool. They view it as a way of understanding what's deployed in their cloud, while security guys look at it as a way of beginning to understand where the security problems are. And it's that difference, I think, that causes some issues.
Cool.
If I may, Alex brought up, I think, a deeper issue in the way we security folks approach development and SDLC, and just our entire approach around cloud, right? Because Alex really
get there. So there you go.
Yeah, but you highlighted a disconnect where you highlighted the incentive and the disconnect in the incentivization within an organization where a developer is essentially paid to push out features at scale, at speed, within sprint, because his bonuses, his KPIs, all of those sit there. And we security people have yet, and I blame us, so I'm not going to blame the developers here. Something really, really awkward in this webinar is going to happen. I'm not going to blame the other side for anything. We're going to do the grown-up thing and admit responsibility. So we security haven't been able to align security to those specific KPIs or features and benefits that the developers really focus on. And so when you look at tools, whether it's CSPM or CNAPP or infrastructure as code, as a security professional, as a CISO, my derivative is what empowers my developers, what helps them get better product out the door faster while they still meet their KPIs and still meet their sprint goals and everything else they have within their full plate, while empowering my security people to be able to address the greatest risks that exist within that cycle. And again, this kind of goes down to risk management, which is really the role of cybersecurity. Really the role of information security within an organization isn't to tell you what to fix, but it's to identify critical risks, identify methods to fix them, and then build a method for the teams that are building products to address security by design rather than security by recourse. And so that involves talking to people. I know it's an awkward thing, but it involves talking to people beyond Slack and beyond just a Zoom conversation. It involves getting into the business process. What's the developer business process? What's a day in the life of?
I think that's kind of an important point like that. So the places where I've seen security work better is where when you try and get a developer to follow a paradigm set up by a security team, it generally fails. And the reason it fails is because the engineering has a strong paradigm in which they follow. Getting engineers, by the way, to follow the standards of the engineering team is a tricky little bit. So as you can imagine, yeah, right. And that's for someone who's intimately understanding the development process. So when you've had security edicts come down or security things come down, it's traditionally been pushed against because they don't fit into the paradigm of an engineering. When I've seen security work better is when it's, instead of trying to make engineering processes fit the security model, is to understand how you inject security into the engineering paradigm, right? And I think when that happens, you see a better approach. I mean, things that engineers hate to understand. Look, I hate to tell you this, but every security issue, for a while, I was an engineer at Fortify. Virtually every security issue that you used to get, guess what? It's a bug, right? You used to tell engineers that. I mean, these are bugs, right? These are bugs with security implications. And in fact, by putting it into the realm of the CISO, in certain ways, you've kind of offloaded bugs into someone else's lap. Infrastructure as code is just broaden that horizon, right? Most of the security issues that you get with the infrastructure code are bugs, right? They're bugs in Terraform templates, the bugs in CloudFormation templates, and things like Kubernetes networks, all that sort of stuff, right? And so, like, I think you have to start thinking about, as an engineer would, and being able to sort of talk about it in those sorts of prospects and trying to fit that into the engineering paradigm. I think it tends to be more successful because, as James said, and also it has to be much more of a collaborative driven approach. Otherwise, stuff just gets, engineers will solve the problem, and if the solving the problem is turning off the EDR and making it look like it's still running, then that's to them the good way of solving the problem, right? That's the truth, right? And so I mean that's the way you have to kind of view it. You've got to stop engineering thinking of security as a dodge, that a hurdle they have to jump through, thinking about it more as a core paradigm in what they do. So.
Right. No, I love those perspectives. I mean, you know, from Alex's point about perceiving the CNAPPs and CSPMs basically as observability tools, which again, let's face it, that's what they are. You know, that observability to James translates into risks because he's seeing all those alerts and deviations and like, oh my God, this is bad. And then James, or, you know, in my past, we needed to kind of categorize and contextualize and risk rank all those things for our environments, while to the engineer, they don't care about it. And the ability basically to take that insight and context and really translate it to engineering terms. And to Alex's point, you know, give it to me as a bug, give it to me, you know, in modern terms, as something that affects my DORA metrics. If I can turn that into something that makes me deploy code faster, more efficiently, aligned with sort of almost SRE paradigms rather than security ones, that's where I believe the bridge between security and engineering lies. And again, that's been my personal journey as a CISO who's seen all of those CNAPP alerts and have lived with grooming those huge backlogs of alerts, convincing myself, oh, these are all mediums and lows because my criticals are dealt with in appropriate time of a sprint or two. While, as we all know, every security incident that ever happened in the cloud is typically rooted with a misconfiguration of sort that, guess what, used to be a low or a medium or something of that sort, where hackers like myself and the rest of us here basically said, all right, I get your mediums and lows, and here's how I'm going to string an attack that instead of banging onto your fancy application, I'm just going to own your entire cloud. So it's really needing to the point about where does those CNAPPs and CSPMs fit into the continuum of security and engineering. We really need to make that shift. We really need to stop thinking about them as observability tools only and means to alert and show what's wrong. Be able to contextualize it and really translate it back into something that an engineer can say, I get it, and I have an incentive. Going back to Alex's first point, I have an incentive to actually take care of that. It's not just a security gap that, again, as a classically trained engineer, I am very capable of arguing and convincing you that it's not actually a bug, or it's still within acceptable parameters and you have no idea what you're talking about. But make this part of my kind of engineering pride of deploying code faster, more reliably, and enabling to meet my metrics.
I like that a lot at the end, especially like kind of meeting the audience where they're at, basically, and fitting into their workflow as opposed to adding more friction and layers along the way. It makes a lot of sense.
I'll say one thing I'll add to what you said, Ian, that I think, if I may just kind of give it a bit more, is I've never looked at what a system will tell me is a low, medium, or high, and looked at it at more than a recommendation rather than anything else.
Right.
I've seen more lows get taken advantage of than highs when it comes to specific incidents that happen in the cloud, where just like you said, a simple misconfiguration, which could be a low misconfiguration, no one thinks twice of it. You give it a 90-day SLA because why the F not, right? And 90 days seems like a good arbitrary number.
Reasonable, yeah.
Reasonable. And really that in those 90 days, someone's really mapped out your entire network, sitting there, mining crypto, having a good time.
The other part there that I think doesn't get touched on, and it's funny you talk about sort of like priorities, is so I've written a lot of security tools, and you write a security tool for the guy who pays the money, which is never the developer. It's always the CISO, right? And so we had this argument back in the day, and I've written a few static analysis tools now, Critwire and Fortify, and like there are issues that will come up that are about 80% going to be a false positive. Include it in the tool. Why? You include it in the tool because you'd much rather have the false positive than the false negative. Because if there's a false negative, they're going to go for another product, right? If they get hacked through a false negative, then it's a problem with your problem, another one. So you build this. And originally when we did this, the idea was, and this is back in the day with Fortify, right? So this is really the first commercial static analysis tool. And the idea was simple as like, the idea is like, you're going to get all these issues and you're going to have this incredibly smart security/developer who's going to audit all those issues, and then is going to put into Jira, or back then it was Bugzilla. This is how old I am. Back then would put into Bugzilla the ones that weren't false positives. That was the idea, right? That was the fundamental grasp that you had. And what happened was the CISOs don't do that. Why? Because the code's really complex. He doesn't have the time and the inclination to look at this and go, this is a false positive or this is a false negative. He is too much false positives and false negative stuff's going on in his Splunk and his SOAR, which they promise don't have them but totally do, right? To let alone look at them from an engineering point. So what happens is you end up ticketing everything and chucking into Jira or Linear, right? If you're cool, it's Linear. If you're old school, it's Jira, right? And so then what happens is the first time an engineer sees something from a security team, odds on it's a false positive. And it sets such a bad precedent. I'm not going to believe anything you say now because it's all junk. And the last company I was at, they pushed in CodeRabbit and we stripped out CodeRabbit within a month. Why? Because it was just AI generated instead of rule-based generated junk that it was flagging. They were all false positives. It didn't understand the full context of the code, all these things. And so you always have this problem where, like, I would be very careful on how you approach developer with that paradigm. If you're chucking stuff over to them and they think, and you're just sending them 90% of the time false positives, they're not going to believe you. When you say this is something that has to get fixed, this has to, they're going to be like, well, you said that about the last four, which are absolute rubbish, right? So, like, I think there's a fundamental disengagement. And I think that disengagement comes from the fact that security tools are made for security people. Even if they're working on source code, it's not a developer's mindset. It's coming from a security mindset. And that's been a big problem you see time and time again. And that's one which I think, again, goes to that fact that you have to think about the developer and have to think about how the developer works and how they approach this, because we're coming by default, we come to the developers with mostly crap, just false positives, right? And that's
We've almost trained them to treat all of that as crap because of all those false positives.
I think we probably trained our tier 1 and tier 2 analysts to treat a lot of that as crap as well, right?
Yeah.
But the challenge that you both mentioned there exists because we're getting these security engineers who don't understand cloud security. And they're trusting technology more than they're trusting knowledge. So they end up feeding a bunch of garbage to engineers that ends up creating so much noise, and you're passing off the noise. So 4 years ago, if we were doing this and it was, and Alex was in the audience and it was just me and Ian, right? Would probably be talking about all the noise, all the signals. Our SIMs are overwhelmed with alarms and all these different things. And all we've done since then is pass off. We haven't really contextualized those security signals in a way to make them more efficient.
Correct.
And anyone who says that is a bold-faced liar. And if they want to have that debate, I'll take them on, right? Like, I'm willing to debate this point because we haven't addressed the signals in terms of how they appear. Now, I know there's startups working on it. What we've done is we've passed off the signals to everyone else in the business. So we've passed off the signals to engineers. We've passed off the signals to infrastructure. We've passed off the signals to them. And we've given them these tools that kind of tell them what the signal is. And we'll look at a report that comes out of a tool. And again, I'm taking full responsibility here as a security professional, right? That tells you, give this to your engineer, he'll know what to do. And then your engineer looks at it and goes, I don't know what the F this is. Get it out of my face. This is a non-issue. And because you don't understand what the engineer is saying, you don't consider it a non-issue. You escalate, right? You start screaming, Chicken Little, sky's falling over something that may be a non-issue. We have to address this gap by essentially turning engineers, right, into security professionals, or turning security professionals into engineers. But there's got to be that person in there that can understand both. And the most successful organizations that I've met in security, I've always had someone in DevSecOps, someone in AppSec, someone there who came from that engineering background, who understood security and was able to combine the two and become that champion. And that's where you see it excel. And everywhere else where you don't have that position, you don't have that unicorn, you're in a world of hurt. You're in for a gluten.
I think that,
Yeah, but that's not scalable.
well, I mean, I think the fundamental issue there though is this, like, there's signals. There were always signals.
Mm-hmm.
They were always, the idea of them was to be able to highlight something and say something might be amiss here, right? There is an exception that when you get a high priority signal, there is an exception that is a real problem, and it's not. There were always signals, and there will always be signals without a context. And the problem you have, the context is extraordinarily difficult when it's just stuff coming to a sim. When the context is coming through code, unless you have full understanding of the context and visibility into the entire platform, you're going to have no idea the validity of that signal. And even worse, the signal might be valid, but there might be 14 mitigating controls between it and like, that's the issue. And I don't know how tractable the context problem is. I mean, like, if you look at even Gen AI, right? And I know Gen AI is going to replace every programmer. If you look what a Gen AI actually generates, most devs will tell you it generates a lot of stuff that doesn't work, right?
Yeah.
Because it doesn't have a context. And they have context windows now of millions, right? That's the context windows they have, right? So when you talk about more legacy security tools, like, they have no context, right? And so the idea at some point was someone's going to give that context, and it just ended up never happening. And I'm not sure if there's an elegant solution. As James said, like, getting that security / developer who actually understands the code and understands how things are deployed, which means he has to spend at least 8 months in your code. That would be an ideal, but that's a very difficult thing to reach, right? So
Yeah, that's why I said it's really not scalable. And just to kind of, complement those points, to address the signals, let me just, blame or complain about something for a second, and then I'll shut it down. We actually have an entire category of products in security that's designed to not just take those signals and pass them along, but amplify them. I mean, this whole SOAR category is designed to mechanize shoving alerts back into the, harder into the bottlenecks that engineering teams are perceived as to security. And then security is able to say, well, I've contextualized things for you here. I've deduped and I'm packing 4 different signals into one alert. Now deal with that. And again, it doesn't really have the context. It just has the fact that there's more to deal with. There's more signals, completely non-contextual, that you've just managed to mechanize. And instead of an engineer manually open those tickets, you've got now a product that does that for you. Again, that doesn't really help. And again, I'm taking responsibility as a former security professional as well. We've used that and we stopped using it because, you're trying to still fit a truck into a small little parking spot. It's not going to work. To the point of context, again, that's something that I really want to hone in on. And again, Alex, you've been with Fortify, you've been in that industry that really lacked the context and said, look, we're looking for signatures. I have no idea what the entire code does. And unfortunately, again, Fortify was a couple of decades ago. Modern tools are still using the same approach. They're still kind of nitpicking and saying, oh, I'm going to find that flaw. And to James's point, there's 14 mitigating controls around it. Don't even flag it. That's fine. Again, as a security professional, I'm totally fine with having vulnerabilities, like valid vulnerabilities and issues, if they have the proper mitigating controls, if they are not reachable to a degree. And products that lack that context are essentially piling on more and more vulnerabilities, more and more signals out of context. And to my point before, we're keeping that, the training that we gave to engineers to ignore us. We're just perpetuating that instead of coming up and saying, in your context, this is what you should do. And showing that I've actually taken the care to look at the context and provide you something that fits to your environment. And that's essentially what James was mentioning before, that unicorn, DevOps, security professional that kind of merges those 2 worlds. And again, I truly wish, and there's been 2 or 3 job jobs before this that I've been trying to train engineers or security people to kind of cross the lines and create that hybrid unicorn that will get deployed. Honestly, at this point, I'm not sure if that's scalable or tenable. And we should be utilizing things like AI to augment existing teams in a way that provides that context.
See, to me, the challenge with overly relying on AI, which is I guess it's a hot buzzword right now. It's a new tech. Everyone has something that AI can do for them, and I get it. Not dismissing the technology, but again, I feel like there's specific aspects where AI today in its current form is great in supporting folks. Where we also see issues with AI, go to any AI code platform that generates AI code, like, you know, Cursor, Windsurf, Gemini, Claude, anywhere. Go to any of the talking boards on Reddit or anywhere else and watch what engineers say about AI's use in code, right? The fact that it creates more issues than it actually solves, that it's good for some things, like the very basics, but it's not really able to take him to the next step as of now. Now, I'm probably going to a year from now, Alex will send me this video and be like, remember that time you said that AI generated code couldn't do this? And now look.
I actually think
it's still true.
Think about it, like AI generated code, I mean, it takes examples and it molds into what your prompt to be, right? And it tries to fit it into the context of the world. Here's the issue with all this stuff, though, right? It still suffers the same context issue that you have before. It only knows what it knows. So it has to have a fundamental, complete understanding of your entire environment for it to generate something that it will fit the environment. And that is extraordinarily difficult. It's the same problem. It's the same problem you have with SOAR. It's the same problem you have with SIM, right? Look. You know, like SIM looks like has a normal detection of James. It's not a normal detection of James. Just every month, James pulls a bunch of data because he's putting together a report for the board or whatever it happens to be, right? But it's a normal detection, right? Now, what normally would happen is then you would go talk to James and you'd get more context and you would understand what that is, right? That's you know how you would shut down that alert, right? There is no tool out there which would do that because it doesn't understand the motive and what James is doing, right? It's trying to derive that from the actions it does. When you think about it from a code point of view, static analysis tool, you know, what I did at Critical, I did at Fortify, it knows all the theoretical paths that could take, but it doesn't know which those theoretical paths are actually going to be taken. So it works on an assumption because it doesn't know the context, right? And the truth is, like, that will always be the case unless you can feed it every piece of information around the entire deployment environment. Now, ironically, we are actually getting there because when you think about it, before, when it was all deployed on real hardware, it was impossible. You had no idea what the real state of the universe was. I once was asked to update a VMS machine. The machine that they pointed to wasn't actually the VS machine that they thought it was. That machine was actually in the cupboard of the master department. That's how it used to be. Then cloud came about, and the idea was like, well, with cloud, at least I can see the environment, and I can question and query the environment because it's all self-defined. But then it turned out that you would get engineers just turning things on and off, and the APIs weren't properly baked, and so it never really got the visibility you wanted. Hence, why you get CSPM. With infrastructure as cloud, though, as infrastructure as code, though, you are reaching a point where you can now say, if I pull down all your repo, and everything's defined as infrastructure as code, which is kudos to you if you've ever done it. I don't think anyone's actually ever done it, but let's say you have, then theoretically, you have enough of information around the environment to be able to make informed signals and informed choices. That's theoretical. So we are reaching that point. Will we ever get there? I don't know. I don't know. Right? Like, but we are more towards that point now than we have been in the last 15, 20 years.
Ever.
So
I couldn't agree more. And again, to James's point about, you know, and to your point as well, Alex, about coding, I will just throw it out there. The latest that I've heard about vibe coding and kind of Gen AI tools used to generate code is vulnerability as a service. As we all know, those things spew out code that is not accurate.
So
And as much as
$50 in tokens in 20 minutes, right?
exactly. And it's, again, it might be great to create a V1 or something of that sort. That might actually work, but then the question is, who owns that code? Does the engineer that vibe code their way into that V1 can actually take that and own that code going forward and make modifications to it and address it and own it? That yet remains to be proven or addressed.
And also, that's not production. Like, you guys aren't running static analysis tools on those sorts of toy POCs. You're just not, right?
Right.
Production
Exactly.
about, it's an organization which has enough clout that it has a CISO, right? And
Right.
so automatically you're talking about a company that is larger than a company that is knocking out in a YC incubator, knocking out a quick and dirty POC. That doesn't scale, right? You're talking about
Right.
optimized code. You're talking about multiple microservices. You're talking about probably ISO standards or, SOC type 2s. You're working in a very different world from the idea of I'm a bedroom coder who's knocked up a POC, right? Like,
Exactly.
that's fundamentally different, and it will always be different.
Right. And to your point, Alex, about being on the cusp of being able to really discern or derive context from IaC, I would dare say I agree, which is a rare thing for me and Alex to do, but we're almost there. And because we're at that point, and again, this is what brought us here, we figured out that can be the context. We can derive context from IaC if we follow all those paths, if we take all those dependencies and modules and literally build a model of what that looks like. That is the context that we can piggyback on. And again, it brought us, at least, kind of sharing a little bit from the Gombok story, it brought us to a funny point of where we can't deliver fixes before you have something in place. We cannot fix what you don't have, a description for. So if you create your first service in Terraform, I have nothing to say about it because it lacks context. Only once we get to that point where you have 2, 3, 4 services and you have some kind of connecting tissue between them and you have some architecture, only then I can apply my AI. And again, to the Gen AI point, it has to be deterministic and based on your architecture. And to create that determinism, I have to have something to work with. Again, that's sort of a chicken and an egg, and that to me is truly the sign that a fix is contextual. If you try to shove it into my code as I create my first service, I know for a fact that you're full of BS.
Yeah.
Give it a fixes once you can discern a context. Once you can discern, like, all right, I see what you're trying to accomplish. Here's a guardrail. Here's a fix. Here's, where you missed something. And I think that's really where James's kind of unicorn DevSecOps, security champion engineer would come in. They wouldn't comment on something that still has like a main open brackets because there's nothing in it yet. Only once you have something to work with, only then security can kick in and say, all right, here's the guardrails. Here's what you're expected to do.
I agree. Just for the avoidance of doubt for the audience, Ian, can you explain deterministic? Because somebody might hear that, say it's another buzzword, but I think it's pretty concise and clear how Gombok is approaching this. Would you mind just giving a quick lowdown?
Sure, really quickly. Deterministic, first of all, what it's not probabilistic. It's not generative. You ask it the same question twice, you're going to get the same answer, whether you like it or not. Deterministic basically means solving a math problem with a calculator rather than with a statistical model of how every other student solved or tried to solve that math problem, which is what Gen AI is. Deterministic is having a knowledge graph or a decision tree rather than an LLM that works on a statistical approximation of what they've seen somewhere else. And again, to this point, the determinism really needs that context. Without it, it doesn't exist. So when I'm talking about deterministic AI, I'm basically saying, we're RTFNing for you all the cloud documentations of all those different services, and we're working on your code as the blueprint. That's basically what it means.
Yeah, cool. And I think that's important to call out, because I think I heard both James and Alex say it, which is, from that engineer point of view, it's like, why would I trust this? The vibe coding, it doesn't really work for me. And so when I think about it in that realm, there could be concern if you have some security tool that's an AI on top of it. I think more precisely, if you think about Gombak, it's kind of like three main sources, right? Taking into consideration the cloud provider documentation, because we're talking about infra as code. So there's specific ways in which the cloud providers recommend the parameters and configs to be set in a secure by manner fashion. Then your source code, so your stuff that actually matters, your templates that you put in. And then lastly, the policies that are specific to an organization. Like right now we have a bunch of compliance frameworks that we map against, but it's also worth calling out that each org isn't the same. I think Alex and James would both testify from their experience too. From one company to the next, you do things differently, and it needs to match the workflow at each company. And I think that's the benefit of AI too, right? Everybody's talking about AI, but it gets you 80% of the way there. Sorry, James, go for it.
There's no single way to practice cybersecurity.
Yeah.
Like there's no, like, it doesn't exist. Like if you've ever, like, as someone who's been a CISO in multiple companies and founded my own companies, there's never a one way to do it. There's company culture, there's company tools, there's product goals, there's the way you're trying to get to where you're trying to get to as an organization. And security at the end of the day is a business enabler. Our job is to reduce risk for the business and support the people that generate revenue for the company. Period. Full stop. Anyone who thinks otherwise, happy to have that debate, but it's just going to be, a bad day for someone. Because realistically,
everyone's going to be debating with James after this.
No, because realistically, that's the goal of security. And oftentimes you go to security conferences and you go, why doesn't my CEO take security seriously? Because you're doing one of three things. You're either generating a lot of internal noise of why people can't get products done on time or fast enough, or you're creating antagonism with the revenue generating teams or the product generating teams, that the CEO goes like, my security team isn't functioning. Number two, it's always when, not if. So you're going to go through a lot of incidents. So let's put these two together. You're generating a lot of noise. You're not really driving anything into the organization. You're then reporting every quarter that you're having you're having multiple events that may or may not be reportable, right? Maybe they're not reportable to the public, but maybe they're reportable to your board of directors or your shareholders or traditional suppliers, right? So you're creating two levels of noise and you're showing no ROI because on the balance sheet, you're a negative. So if you're doing all of that, you're destined to fail in security. You're destined to fail in it. That's why I say I practice cybersecurity like a doctor practices medicine. There's a lot of ways you can do a lot of different tests to reach a diagnosis, right? And different tests will show up differently. 5 tests will be normal. Then their one test will be, okay, we did a bubble study on your heart. You have an issue in your heart. Everything else was normal, but that one bubble study showed something in your heart. That's the science of medicine, and cyber is the same. My goal is to reduce risk for the organization, enable the business to do what it needs to do as efficiently and as cost effectively as I possibly can. And I don't do that by trying to create a shell of everything else. I do that by observing, watching, building relationships, identifying the right tools, making the people who are going to utilize those tools, whether it be Wiz, Orca, Gumbach, or whatever, part of the buying process, part of the POC process, so that I get buy-in, so that I get feedback. And I don't always need to have best in class. Right? In security today, you don't need best in class often. You need best in suite because the market is consolidating. The big players are consolidating. I mean, Google buying Wiz for $32 billion. If that's not Google after Mandiant and Wiz, right? They're two kind of flagship acquisitions. Like if that's not them throwing their hat into the arena of saying we're now a cybersecurity company, then I think we're reading the different tea leaves.
To your
Alex,
point about the science of medicine, take that one step further. Once you got the diagnosis, the treatment again needs to be tailored for the patient. For the same heart problem, two different patients are going to get a different treatment. And again, this is again where security fails, because a lot of tools are like, there you go, get this pill, use this, do this surgery. Well, that doesn't work for everyone. And that's where we, again, or I used to be a security professional, used to tailor the right solution for my business to your point, James, enable it to take that risk or live with that risk or manage that risk and execute on the business strategy.
Alex, I saw you holding back a few times there. I wanted to ask you to chime in if you don't mind.
I mean, it's always hard being security, right? Because you can be the most unsecure company in the world, right? But if no one hacks you, no one hacks you, right? You can be the most secure company, but if you've got one, you've always got the sort of defender's dilemma, right? And so you always have this issue where you're always talking about what could happen. And I always find it funny. I think Torvald Linus says, every time we do something cool, we have to stop doing it because the security team has a problem with it, right? Like that's the issue you fundamentally have. You're always the naysayer in the space, right? And you're always talking about the doomsday scenario, right? And so you have to be able to mitigate those risks in a manner that makes sense.
Right.
Like, it is really about mitigating risk. So all of this is really about the low-hanging fruit, right? Like if a state actor wants to get into your platform, they're going to get into your platform. It's just nothing you're going to do about it, right? But like the idea is to make it increasingly ever more difficult to fit your risk profile, and particularly when it comes to cloud. I suppose CloudFormation templates and Terraform and infrastructure as code at least allows you to understand your environment in a way that you never could before. And I think that's a massive boon from a security perspective. I remember doing my SOC type 2 and someone's asking, where's my network diagram? And I'm like, I don't have a network diagram. I have everything in
it's
place, right?
It's in code.
Yeah, right. And I think that at least allows you a much more of a fighting chance, right? And I think from that side of things, I will say this, right? Gen AI is deterministic. I hate to tell you this. It's pseudo-probabilistic because nothing on a computer without specialized equipment is non-deterministic, but that's just a bugbear of mine. So I would be on that one side of things. And the other side is like there are, and I would also push back on the Wiz thing. I think the reason Wiz did well is because it gave developers an insight that they didn't see before. And I think, like, I was at a company, we had 100 developers, 125 developers, they all use Wiz. We had 3 people in the security team, right? They weren't using Wiz daily because the security team wants them. The security team loved that they used it, but they used it for an observability thing. And I think that shows you an incredible paradigm of like being able to, if you do something that the developers genuinely think is useful, they'll get buy-in from them. And if you can get that buy-in from them, I think it's a profound place to be in security. And if you look at the companies with crazy valuations in this sort of intersection, it's those ones that understand the developer and have made a tool that fits the developer paradigm as well as the security one. In fact, in some cases, I would argue strongly that they fit this developer paradigm much more than they fit the security paradigm. So like, I think that's kind of where you need to be. From a practical
Right.
standpoint, like infrastructure as code is great. Make sure you do security reviews. I would also talk about cyber resilience and the idea of like impressing upon your development team that hey, these are security issues, but they really are development issues, right? You are producing code that has problems, right? Like I might be the guy who talks to you about it instead of the other one. But like, these are quality metrics that need to be ascertained and put into, Datadog dashboards, put into your pipeline. you know, you need to be talking about these things you talk about any other bug. And I think having that helps with the side of things as well. So,
right.
I mean, it's clear that there's like a consensus among all of us, right? That there's an importance of context and security signals and being able to focus.
Security professional, so that's not true. No security professional I know has ever made a call
Agree with it.
alone with another group, right?
Well, it sounds like we have a decent forum in that sense, but I
Yeah,
digress.
I will remind Alex of our initial conversation where he ended it with "Get your filthy hands off of my code," and ended our second conversation basically with saying, "This is how you should, you know, attempt to provide those fixes to my code." And we actually have it named as the Alex feature in terms of like, from an engineering perspective, this is what I need. This is where I want you to meet me and provide that fix to me. So yes, I'll always cherish that moment. And it's really a learning experience, and really understanding that, again, security has to come to the developer with using their own language, meeting them where they're at, and really not speaking security. We need to speak in their terms, in DORA metrics, in observability, in engineering excellence, in SRE language to a degree. Yes, it packs the security punch in it, but at least it aligns with the engineering incentive rather than someone else's incentives.
I think it is all. Not all bugs are a subset of security, but all all security bugs are a subset of bugs, right? I mean, like you have
Right.
that idea that engineering has to understand that these are fundamentally issues that are not, even if they didn't have a security impact, they have a quality of life impact and they have a code quality impact that has to be addressed. That was the true with static analysis. It's true now with infrastructure as code, right? It's just the way it is, right? And a lot of convenience tools that automatically generate a lot of stuff, including the Gen AI stuff, are based off examples that deliberately are shortened and deliberately simplistic because they were there to prove a particular point rather than to write code. And so you have to understand that they will also have these issues as well, right? That's just the way they're going to be.
Right.
So.
Fair point. I know we only have about 4 minutes left, guys. So in the last few minutes, I'd love to hear one key takeaway or actionable advice that you might have for the audience. James, let's start with you.
Actionable advice or one takeaway is align security with what the business is doing. Can't say that enough. Keep saying it, because I think once you do that, then you'll be able to actually practice good cyber.
I like that you said practice good cyber again. So for anybody who missed it, it's akin to being a doctor practicing medicine. You wouldn't prescribe the same prescription or treatment for a patient with the same illness. So if me and Ian had the same issue, you wouldn't give us the same prescription.
Nope.
Alex. Oh, sorry, James. What else did I miss?
No, you gave the perfect thing. One medicine may work for you, but another one may not work for me, and I'm gonna need something different. So
spot on. Same thing for businesses and security. Ian, let's go with you.
Oh, you're leaving Alex for the closing? All right.
Same as the start.
Yeah.
Come on.
I'm going to shamelessly kind of provide an example of my personal journey of understanding that security needs to be adaptive and truly practice it to James's point. Not just from a business perspective, but really understanding and again, I've done that previously with where I used to be a CISO overseeing 15 businesses. I had to learn each and every business, what motivates it, what even what the dev team is like, what technologies are they using, what applications they're developing, and tailor it to them. So again, it's not just understanding the business context, it's really understanding the patient, it's understanding the motivations, back to Alex's point, and meeting them where they're at, truly engaging. And again, if you don't have the knowledge or the skills, find the right tools to augment that. That would be my advice. And there's plenty of tools, there's plenty of approaches that can do that, but you still have to measure them based on the efficacy of them meeting your particular organization.
Thanks, Ian. Alex, last 2 minutes are yours.
If you want the most practical advice I could give you is make security a subset of the engineering process. Like instead of, I would talk to the VP of engineering, I would talk to the CTO, and I would push very hard on the idea of making KPIs measured around closing and securing bugs around security. I think when you derive KPIs and OKRs that directly align, then when you have those conversations, you're no longer begging your engineering team to fix the issue, because what you're basically saying is, I have an OKR and I need you to do the work to fulfill my OKR. And they're going to go, well, I have my own OKRs and your work doesn't fulfill my OKRs, right? In fact, it stops me from fulfilling my OKRs. So if you can align the OKRs and the KPIs to be in the same space, then it's when you build a cyber resilience platform, and that's when you get better security. So I would push from a purely practical standpoint, make money. The OKR, people do OKRs because they want their bonuses, all right? Align their bonuses with yours, and you'll find that life becomes infinitely easier from it. And that's where I would push it.
Cool. This is all really solid, practical advice for the whole audience. We're at time now. And so I just want to say thank you to all the audience. Thank you to the panelists. It's been a fun discussion. Feel free to reach out to any of us. We'll be happy to answer questions or just, talk about security. So thank you again, everybody.
Right.
Perfect.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone. That's Alex, James.
Bye-bye.
Right.